Good morning to those of you that are in the UK. Good afternoon to those joining us from Asia. Please do let us know in the chat where you're dialing in from. We'd love to know who we have in the room today. So welcome to this special London Climate Action Week event, which is beaming to you from various points on the compass, chiefly from the countries that share the tallest mountain range on Earth, the Hindu Kush Himalaya. This event falls under the London Climate Action Week theme of Beat the Heat, and it's a chance to widen our lens beyond London to focus on the impact of temperature rise on Asia and on Asia's snow and ice in particular. My name's Annie Dare, and I'm Head of Communications at ICIMOD, which is an organisation that's headquartered in Kathmandu, Nepal, and which has since 1983 served as the Intergovernmental Research and Development Centre for this region, for its people and for its nature. The Hindu Kush Himalaya, that it is ICIMOD's mandate to protect and study and advocate for, is an extraordinary geophysical zone. It's a vast highland crescent that sweeps 3,500 kilometers all the way from Afghanistan and Pakistan in the west down to Myanmar and Bangladesh in the east. It includes the Indian Himalayan hill states, the plateaus, deserts, and mountains and steppes of southwest China, and it covers all of Nepal and the Kingdom of Bhutan. Crucially, for today's discussion, it holds the third largest mass of snow and ice after the two poles. This zone is warming at twice the global average, and even the snow and ice on Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, is now disappearing at unprecedented rates. 2/3 of this region's frozen water reserves are set to disappear by the end of the century, and changes are coming much, much faster than that. The Himalaya, of course, literally translates as abode of snow in Sanskrit, but the loss of this region's snow and ice is about much more than identity. It has implications for human survival, for peace and security, for migration. Close to 300 million people live in these mountains. That's almost half the entire population of Europe, and meltwater from the mountains contributes to rivers on which 2 billion people depend for fresh water. Failing to cut the cord on dirty fossil energy is having other drastic and immediate consequences in the form of flash floods, dangerous glacial lakes, and at the other extreme, droughts and wildfires. In order to raise awareness of the dire implications that temperature rise on these mountains has for human populations and the natural world, ICIMOD launched a new advocacy campaign last year on the anniversary of the first ever ascent of Everest. We called it SaveOurSnow, whose acronym, of course, given that this is a mayday from these mountains, is the very apt SOS. While incubated by ICIMOD, it's really about setting out to create an alliance that is going to get the message out about what's happening here by bringing together and amplifying the voices of 3 powerful groups, all of whom have intimate knowledge of what's happening in high mountain Asia, and all of whom are uniquely well placed to communicate those impacts to wider audiences. The 3 groups that SOS brings together, and of which our panel are brilliant representatives, are firstly mountain scientists, especially glaciologists, who've grown more motivated than ever to speak out as they've watched climate impacts on Earth's cryosphere rapidly outpace their worst projections. Secondly, mountain communities, especially indigenous groups, people that are frontline to these impacts, often furthest from power, and are knowledge holders of the solutions. So SOS seeks to platform these communities and to equip them with the best available science. Finally, mountain athletes, climbers, guides, filmmakers, and other creatives, people who through their professional work spend a huge amount of time in the mountains, are also equally alarmed by the speed of the changes that they're seeing, and that are often truly gifted communicators with extraordinary power to connect to wider audiences. This discussion, of course, could not come at a more alarming moment, given what's happening right now in the countries that share these mountains. Asia has been engulfed in extraordinary heat. Scores have died in India, possibly hundreds in Pakistan. Climate impacts are already pushing communities with huge existing vulnerabilities in terms of malnutrition, water and food insecurity to breaking point. SOS, I suppose, is a call for solidarity. I hope that there are many people who are joining us from London as well. And I guess the question is, why should all this matter to London? First, because of course, while occupying just 2% of Earth's land surface, cities produce more than 60% of global greenhouse emissions. Decision makers and publics in London need to know that the emergency is here and now, and that it is existential. Secondly, because cities, including London, have a hugely catalytic role to play in powering the solutions by redirecting their investment portfolios and pensions away from fossil fuels and into the solutions that need scaling up. And yes, by making sure that every political party is competing to do the most on climate rather than the least. Thirdly, there's an opportunity here to awaken some of the many links that exist between the UK and this region. There's a huge and illustrious tradition of climbing and exploration in the UK. How can we knit these powerful individuals and august organisations into this push for faster changes? SOS is one conduit. There are also hugely strong ties between academia and research institutes in the UK and Asia. How can we do more to leverage these affiliations, the knowledge and the profile of individuals and universities? And excitingly too, London is, of course, one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world. What more could we do to support the flow of ideas, of urgency, of agency between communities in Asia that are frontline to the impacts and diaspora communities in the UK? So SOS sets out to reinforce and enliven some of these ties of solidarity and to try to build a much bigger caucus to push for that generational shift that we now stand on the cusp of, and to do it before it's too late. You can find out more at SaveOurSnow.earth. So now on to our panel. As I said, they're an amazing representative of the kind of SOS groups that we seek to forge together in this alliance, filmmakers, scientists, and athletes. Starting with the filmmakers, we have hopefully joining us on a secure line, but in a very remote area of Pakistan, Nail Munaddin, who recently moved to Islamabad from the UK, where he completed his Masters in Wildlife Filmmaking from Bristol's University of West England. Niall worked as a researcher and drone operator for BBC's Planet Earth, and his amazing directorial debut, When the Floods Come, has, we've just found out, been nominated for a BAFTA. He's joining us from the base of Nanga Parbat, an 8,000-meter peak in the Western Himalaya. We also have another filmmaker. I'll introduce the panel first and then we'll go to each in turn. We have the 22-year-old Tashi Lazom. Tashi hails from Limi in Humla in the far, far west of Nepal. She's just directed her first film, No Monastery, No Village, which examines the existential threat her home village faces due to rising global temperatures. As well as filmmaking, Tashi is passionate about making sure that local communities in the mountains have the best available scientific knowledge so that they know how important it is to fight for low emission scenarios. With me in Kathmandu today at ICIMOD HQ, we have Tenzing Chogyal Sherpa, a cryosphere analyst at ICIMOD. Tenzing has helped to install one of the highest weather stations on the planet. He also ran a hugely important ice core study of Khumbu, the infamous glacier beneath Everest. He's ethnically Sherpa, and he's the grandson of Kancha Sherpa, who is the last survivor of the first ascent of Everest. In Europe, fresh from the key UN June climate summer talks, we're joined by Dr. James Kirkham, who is a trained glaciologist, an alumni of ICIMOD as well, who now works across Earth's frozen zones. James is Chief Science Advisor to the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative. He's coordinator of the Ambition on Melting Ice high-level group on sea level rise and mountain water resources. On to the climbers, we're very fortunate to have Baba Ali, a trained doctor from Bangladesh's most forested zone, Chattogram, who has for the past decade spent much of his life in the mountains of the Himalayas. This year he climbed both Everest and Lhotse, becoming just, I believe, the 11th Bangladeshi mountaineer to stand on top of the summits of the tallest mountain on Earth. He's also a seasoned climate athlete advocate, having trekked through every single district in Bangladesh campaigning against plastic pollution. Finally, in the furthest east in Tokyo, we have an amazingly legendary ultra athlete and policy director to the FCDO in Tokyo, Carol Fox, who has scaled multiple Himalayan peaks and set records for ultra trail races in Asia. She is about to embark on a completely amazing ultra endurance test to raise awareness of the climate crisis in the mountains of the Himalayas. So, starting with the far west in Pakistan, in Hunza, I talked really briefly in the intro about kind of enlivening the bonds that tie diaspora Asians back to this region that is so frontline. Niall, you've taken this to the extreme. You've just left the UK to set up your film studio in Islamabad. Can you talk about what made you go back?
Hi everyone. Hi Annie. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm beaming in from Hunza Valley here in Pakistan. Just yesterday, we came down from a big trek up to Nanga Parbat Base Camp, a place which I had never been to before. And yeah, as Annie was saying, I just completed a master's in Bristol in the UK, which is kind of the hub for natural history filmmaking. And was thinking that I would try to find a career there, but after making our most recent film, When the Floods Come, and seeing the response that it got around the world, the impact that sharing the stories of people in Pakistan, Pakistanis who are living along the Indus River and being so heavily impacted by climate change, I realized that the place to be was really on the front lines of where stories and people's stories are need to be kind of amplified and told. So yeah, I'm now here back in Pakistan. We've just launched Jungli Films, and hopefully soon starting on some new exciting projects about the Indus and about the glaciers and about climate change here in Pakistan.
Thanks. You talked about When the Floods Come. Can you talk about how it was made and relate some of the most powerful stories that you heard while you were filming it, or anything that surprised you about people's understanding or others of the climate crisis?
I was in England in 2022 when the floods of the monsoon floods and the heat waves occurred here, causing billions of dollars of damage to a country whose economy is already in shambles. And but while I was there, I noticed that the only things that I was really seeing on the news and these articles and everything was about statistics and about the numbers of people dead and how many billions of dollars of damage. But nowhere, on no news channel, on no report, on no news article, did I really see something that described the intimate, personal kind of impact that an event like this has on people. Because I think in today's world, there's so many horrible things happening everywhere, and we get bombarded with these statistics. And I think in that we lose a bit of the humanity, and we forget that these are people just like us who are experiencing these things. So my intention with this film, with When the Floods Come, was to come back to Pakistan and travel the length of the Indus River from the glaciers in the north of the country. Pakistan has more glaciers than anywhere else on Earth outside of the poles, and the people here are directly dependent on that ice and the waters that come from it for their livelihoods, and they have for thousands of years. So we followed the Indus from the north down through the Punjab, which is kind of the agricultural heart of the country, which is also 100% dependent on the Indus River. And down to Sindh, which was the most impacted area of Pakistan by the monsoon floods. And we tried to go and speak to people and show people in the most humanizing way, to show people across the world that these aren't just people, statistics. Pakistanis aren't just, people who, are on the other side of the world and are migrants and, people who are not like us. They're actually, through the stories that we tried to share of these people, we tried to show people, living in, Argentina and Japan and, the UK, that the struggles that people are going through here in Pakistan right now, we talk about climate anxiety and the fear of the future and all of that. That's happening here now. And I think by hearing the voices and the stories of the people who are going through it now, and realizing that, the dreams and the hopes of people living along the Indus River being impacted are almost the same dreams and hopes and fears and all of those things that anywhere else in the world feel. Also, the pain of losing a child, the fear of not knowing, what the future is going to look like, if you're going to be able to give a better life to your children. All of these things are deeply human, and they're what actually connect all of us together. And so, helping the people of Pakistan deal with this crisis, the point of this film was to show that helping people here in Pakistan is actually, it's not helping somebody on the other side of the world. It's helping somebody just like you. And so we're working to try to, you know, use filmmaking and storytelling and these kind of tools to get that kind of emotion and that empathy out into the world.
Lots of different political figures keep on repeating that there's a discrepancy or a disconnect. We just talked about connecting and that kind of solidarity between publics, but there's a disconnect between the kind of felt impacts of climate change and political will and political action. Where, to your mind, do we sit vis-a-vis that, the connection between publics and political leaders, whether in Pakistan or in the UK or the USA, all of whom you have kind of connections to?
It's an interesting question, but I'm actually starting to feel more and more optimistic about this subject, that, you know, stories and films and changing these kinds of narratives and trying to go for people's hearts, you know, making films and sharing the most intimate stories of people has the ability to move policymakers and people who can actually do something about this crisis. Business leaders, politicians, people who don't have the political or economic will right now. I think that the only way to get to these people is to go for the hope that there's some remaining shred of empathy and love for your fellow man and woman. That's, I think, you know, we can have as many COPs as we want. We can have as many panels in Azerbaijan and, you know, Qatar as we want. It's only by making the people who have the possibility, the power to do something about this crisis that is like at the tipping point. It's through these stories and these ways of communicating, I think, that we can push them towards making a decision that maybe doesn't make complete economic sense, that maybe doesn't make, you know, perfect political sense for their careers at that moment, but are the decisions that we need to make to actually shift our course a little bit to be able to, you know, survive on this planet. There are billions of people, you know, over 1 billion people reliant on the waters of these mountains where, you know, where we're sitting. And the decisions and the power to do something about saving this incredible resource that we have, that so many people are reliant on, people and beings and animals and entire ecosystems. It's through those stories that I think that we can push them towards doing the right thing.
Thanks, Niall. We'll move on to Tashi now, another filmmaker, 22 years old. You've just made your directorial debut, and it is absolutely chimes with what Niall was just saying about really connecting people with human stories. Yours is incredibly personal. Can you talk about how you made your film, No Monastery, No Village?
Hi everyone. Before making this movie called No Monastery, No Village, I did a lot of research, and I do a lot of advocacy writings. And then I realized that my audience or my targeted audience are not educated. And I realized that this writing restricts to, so-called exclusive educated people only. But my aim was to make the climate change the issue of common people. And for that to happen, my writing was not really helping me at all. I had to do something different, and that's where the filmmaking comes in. I did training, and yes, that's how the idea was born. It was difficult in the beginning, not because I'm a new filmmaker, but because the community, my community, has never been properly filmed before, and people were skeptical. And then when you say that you're going to make a movie about climate change, some of them or most of them don't really have a good idea about what that is. And when I said that it's about glacier and the avalanche and the flood, then they started to say that, it's because that's because the god was angry, or because it's a result of what our bad karma. It could be a result of our bad karma. When they start say that, it kind of pained me, because they're blaming their faith, they're blaming their doings for this climate crisis, and which is so untrue. So I felt it more important to bring their stories up, and also to take out the scientific perspectives to them as well by localizing it. So the movie is called No Monastery and No Village, and it kind of is self-explanatory in nature, saying that this entire existence of this village depends on a one particular cultural heritage that was built in 11th century, called the Rinchen Monastery, and it's one of the Nepal's oldest monastery. The problem here is that this intangible cultural heritage is being affected by glacial lake outburst flood, and the glacial lake is just 6.5 kilometers away from this monastery. So there's not much many reasons to live in the Himalayas, except that if you enjoy the beauty of the mountains, but then when there is not much economic resources, not lack of infrastructural development, or the indifference nature of state towards these Himalayan communities, then a lot of people tend to migrate to urban cities. But then this particular village in my community, or my village people, find a reason to stay in the village because of the monastery, the divine connection that they have with the monastery, and this monastery is being affected by flood. So I wrote a lot of papers on that way before. It just did not get well propagated among people. But when I made the movie, a lot more people came to know more about it, because there it was, because in the movie it was not just a facts and figure, it was emotions, it was people's connection and strong bond to the monastery, and that how people are willing to give up everything to save this monastery, and so many more. So yeah, and the entire setting of this movie is in my village, or it is called Limi Valley, and it is in the northwestern part of Nepal, and it's like the largest ward unit within the rural municipalities of Nepal, and more than 50% of its territories is a grassland, and it forms the western end of Tibetan Plateau, which is the world's highest plateau. So there's much more to it. The Limi is also known as the Shangri-La for wildlife biodiversity, because it has more wildlife species than the population of Limi, the entire population of Limi combined. And it houses wild yak, which is a critically endangered species, and it was again also once declared extinct from Nepal until it was found in Limi. So it's really a hotspot for biodiversity that the people of Limi has been catering to and conserving for centuries. So to put you in perspectives, these people have been the most climate friendliest people on earth, yet they are facing the wrathful consequences out of the warming temperature. So they blame themselves and their fate and their mountain gods being angry for the crisis that they're going through. But in reality, as a so-called educated person, when we know that what's really happening, I felt a moral obligation to do more than just writing, just to do more than just speaking at events. So I went to the village and did the movie, and although there was not much direct, positive impacts coming out of the movie, but I can say this much, that at least the language, the indigenous language, the movie is made in indigenous language with English subtitle. It is being documented, because it is again endangered language in itself. And then in the movie it mostly tells about their own indigenous way of life, indigenous way of thinking, which by the way was very difficult to translate to English, but still it gave a platform to a platform to be documented. And most importantly, the village did not just face glacial lake outburst flood. By the very next year, the valley faced massive avalanches that took lots and lots of yaks away. So yak is this Himalayan version of cow, and the people do rearing of it, and it's the second most important source of livelihood. And when that was carried away, the agriculture is already degrading. The agriculture output is already decreasing, and so there goes the yak too. And it pained me because neither the glacial lake outburst flood in 2011 and nor the massive avalanches event of 2012 made it to national news in Nepal. So there's so much disparity, and let alone forget the fact that reaching of adaptation and mitigation funds there. So there was so much pressure on me as a person, moral pressure to speak up about this one, because Nepal, not just Nepal, many countries talk about indigenous communities being one of the most vulnerable communities again in the face of climate crisis. And yes, a lot of countries get funds, but do the funds really go to the grassroots? That becomes really questionable. And that's where I come in. I'm trying my small part, saying that, oh, these people are not just data and all of that.
Tashi, thank you so much. And I'd love to talk. Hopefully there'll be time for questions later and we can talk more about the role of Indigenous communities within global processes and also in national politics. Moving kind of slightly to the east, we'll pass to Tenzing Chogyal Sherpa next. Tenzing, you're just back from Namche. Most of us assume that it might be immune from temperature rise so high up on the roof of the world, but what exactly are you seeing? What are you reporting from your latest trip?
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Tenzing Chogyal Sherpa. I'm a cryosphere analyst working here at ICIMOD. So I'd just like to start my talk with this picture. This may look like a normal mountain to many of you. Many of you may not know what this mountain is or not be very familiar with this mountain. And some of you might have seen this mountain while on your trek to the Everest, because this is the first mountain that you would see while you're making your journey up to the Everest Base Camp. And this mountain is called Mount Kongde, and it lies just on the south side of Namche Bazar. So Namche Bazar is my hometown. It lies at an altitude of 3,500 meters above sea level. And for the people here, this mountain is what we've seen from our childhood, from our adulthood, and the moment we die as well. Because our village itself is shaped in a way that is perched up to just view this mountain. Now, why I bring up this mountain is because just a week ago, I was up in my village for festival celebrations, and amidst the celebrations with my colleagues, my friends, my families and relatives, everybody, like some of them started to go out and then look outside the window on the terraces, and then everybody looked quite concerned. So naturally, I myself was also curious to see what was going on outside. And the view outside was quite ominous. So this is the same mountain. This was just a week ago that I saw. If you look at the changes in the before picture, and now you'll see that this mountain now has no snow. Literally no snow. It's just bare rocks. And even the waterfalls and the streams that used to derive from this mountain is now dried up. It speaks a lot, because I don't need to elucidate more on this, because the picture itself says a lot, and the local people also felt this quite a lot. I myself saw this changes in this mountain. I asked my elders, because snow is so dynamic, because snow has this strong seasonality, that you have less snow and higher snow during the seasons. And I asked my elders that, is this the first time you've seen the snow like that? So that they said yes, and it is very concerning. And they had this thought like, why is this happening? Does this mean that this is a bad sign? Is it a bad sign for the environment? Is it a bad sign for the community? Did we do something? Is it our karma? Like Tashi also mentioned before. So the question is the same. And the answer there is, yes, we do not have anything to do with it. The mountain people have least contributed to these kind of climate change, but the impacts are already being felt in these regions, and specifically in case of snow. So these are just videos showing more close-up videos of literally no snow. You can just see how bare the mountain is. And that brings us to snow, because the topic here is Save Our Snow. I'll just go further into why snow is so important. Snow is the primary ingredient for a glacier. The glacier ice that you see on a glacier is formed from snow, and glaciers are in this consistent balance between how much snowfall they receive and how much melting it experiences. But now we have this scenario where we have warming temperatures, and we have dwindling and lessening snowfall, due to which it's a worst case scenario for the glaciers, and the glaciers are now seeing unprecedented melting at an alarming rate. At the same time, snow itself is very intertwined with mountain livelihood. Mountain livelihood itself has evolved around snow, the way we dress, the way our houses are made, the way our lifestyle has evolved with. So the mountain people have a love and hate relationship with snow. Snow is an integral part of the community. And me being a glaciologist, so we go to the field and trying to quantify like how these snows are changing, how the snowpacks are changing. So these are just some glimpses of some of the field work that we do in the high mountain Asia as part of the fields of ICIMOD. And at the same time, snow is very important to glaciers. So these are just some glimpses of what we do in the field, trying to quantify how much these ice are melting. Just to bring some context, why I bring this up is because somebody saying 3 meters melting, somebody showing you data, figures, and everything is one thing. But actually going to the field, actually seeing these happen with your own eyes gives you a perspective and scale and gravity of the situation. So that is why I wanted to just give you an example. So this is a stake that we just put on, we drill into a glacier like the video I showed before, and we just monitor how much the stake is then exposed as the glacier surface slowly thins down. And just within a year, we saw about 3 meters of melt. That's quite a lot. That's about, if you are in a building right now, that's as the height of your of the whole floor. So that just gives you a context of how much melting is going on, specifically in this high mountain Asia. At the same time, I was also part of an expedition in 2018, where we went to the highest glacier in the world, the glacier that originates from Mount Everest itself. And with the team from University of Leeds and University of Aberystwyth, we drilled into the ice to look at how cold the ice is. But to our surprise, the ice within the glacier was warmer than that of the mean air temperature. But keep in mind, this is all below 0 degrees Celsius. In the Save Our Snow video as well, I was talking about how the glaciers are warming up from the inside, because this means that glaciers are slowly now warming up from the inside, getting to that tipping point that is 0 degrees Celsius. After 0 degrees Celsius is where you will see this phase change from snow to ice. So you might not see these melt right now, but there is a time lag where we might get to this point and this tipping point is crossed, and we might have this drastic melting. And due to that, the evidences are quite visible. And in the high mountain Asia, you can see these glaciers have retreated quite far. These are some of the glaciers from the region. The reason why we monitor glaciers is because these are the most visible symptoms of climate change. Climate change is the disease itself. These changes in the snow, these changes in the glacier, as just the visible symptoms that you see, are just the tip of the iceberg. And the real disease itself is climate change. Unless we tackle the disease itself, just tackling these impacts, these symptoms will not be the solution. But we should not ignore these symptoms, because these symptoms itself have been causing a lot of damage, specifically in the high mountain Asia. So these are some visible evidences. Not much to say here. I think it's quite distinct from these images. And these are some from the Everest region. And sometimes it's not as visible to the eyes. Like this is a picture from 1952, even before Everest was summited. On the right side, you see the same Everest in 2021. If you just look at the picture, there's not much difference. And sometimes we need to put some science behind it, because sometimes these glaciers are thinning from within. Even in the Everest Base Camp, you can see that within about 56 years, there's been a maximum of about 80 meters thinning. So 80 meters thinning is quite a lot. So it just gives you a context on how much melting that's being, specifically in the highest point in the world. And that is why we started the Save Our Snow campaign. We released it 1 year ago on the 70th anniversary of the first ascent of Mount Everest. On the picture, you will see me and my grandfather, who is the last survivor of the first summit of Mount Everest. And why we bring this up is because the cause of climate change may be global, but the impacts can already be felt locally, specifically in this high mountain Asia. And when the world is still debating if and when climate change is happening, climate change is already happening here. And it's not a matter of talking or debating. Now it's a matter of action. And these actions might be too late. And it's now or never. And that is why we also go to these the people that live in the high mountain Asia, because they have seen these changes, they have lived through these changes, they have felt these changes, and it's a human story at the same time. So we went out and we actually brought and documented these observations so that we can echo and amplify these voices towards the world, so that the world itself will wake up and see that these the impacts of climate, these first symptoms of climate change are already happening, and we can't ignore them far too long. Because at the end of the day, if you are a researcher, student, scientist, practitioner, all of our work should be going towards saving the lives and livelihood of the mountains. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tenzing. And yes, that's exactly one of the reasons why Save Our Snow exists, which is to turn that extraordinary vulnerability of mountain communities into a kind of advocacy strength by capturing those voices and sending them far and wide. Moving on to James. James, you are intimately connected with the mountains here, having worked at ICIMOD, but you study not just these glaciers, but glaciers all over the world, from the Alps and the Pyrenees to the Andes and the Rockies, the Arctic, the Antarctic. Can you talk about what's happening, what the outlook is, and particularly for mountain water reserves before going into the kind of wider cryosphere picture, please?
So you already heard some heartbreaking stories from the front lines of the cryosphere crisis here. And today I'm going to give you a brief overview of the big picture of what the latest science is actually saying. So unfortunately, the big picture for glaciers globally is one of extensive loss. And this will have massive knock-on effects for the economic, energy, water, food security challenges faced by nations in the coming years. These graphs, as you can see now, show the percentage of glacial ice remaining under different temperature scenarios from now until the year 2300. Mountain glaciers globally are currently losing 300 billion tons of ice every single year. And even at 2 degrees, Europe will lose 80% of its glaciers by 2100. And the Hindu Kush will lose half of its glacier volume by the end of this century. If we continue on our current emissions pathway, will result in the extinction of nearly all glaciers worldwide before the year 2300. Now, these graphs are becoming a reality because countries are already losing all of their glaciers. Many of you will have seen in the news recently that Venezuela lost its very last glacier after a sharp decline, which you can see on the right of this slide here. Glaciers in the tropical Andes supply critical water to communities during dry seasons. So this ice really matters in terms of water security, as well as its cultural significance to local people. And the sad news is that many other countries will soon follow Venezuela in losing their glaciers. Indonesia will lose the last tropical glacier in Asia within the next 2 years. Germany and Mexico are on track to lose their last glaciers within the next 5 years. And Colombia, Ecuador, and several East African countries will lose theirs soon after that. But we have a choice still. And for glaciers, every fraction of a degree matters. Yes, some loss is already committed, but the outcome towards the end of this century is still to be decided. And you can see that from the difference between these two animations, our current emissions on the left and the very low emissions pathway we can strive towards on the right. If we rapidly lower our CO2 emissions now, we can stabilize these ice losses. And if countries can keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees, we can still save about half of the world's glacier ice, which will have enormous benefits for livelihoods, energy, water, food security of billions of people across the world. Now, we can't talk about snow and ice without discussing sea level rise, because this is already causing huge damage globally. And a recent example showed that the sea level rise caused by fossil fuel burning to date led to an extra $8 billion of damage from Hurricane Sandy. That's $8 billion of extra damage for one single event at today's 23 centimeters of sea level rise. So future sea level rise will be dominated by the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets, which have undergone massive ice loss over the last 20 years. The 7 worst years of ice loss have all occurred in the last decade, and the current rates of loss observed in Greenland are currently tracking above even the worst case projections of the IPCC. Now, because of the melting of glaciers and ice sheets, irreversible sea level rise of at least 30 centimeters above today's levels is now locked in by 2070. And the latest science we have now clearly shows that the world will experience faster sea level rise at lower temperatures. And not only that, but only 1.5 degrees, not 2 degrees, in slow rates of sea level rise in the long term. But most concerningly of all, the dotted line you see on this graph from the IPCC, which was included in the 2021 assessment, despite being based on only 2 studies at the time, has been supported again and again by a growing weight of studies since, including one just published 2 days ago. And if our ice sheets begin to accelerate rapidly, we could see 1 meter of sea level rise by 2070, 3 meters in the early 2100s, and over 10 meters can't be ruled out by 2300. Now, we're all speaking as part of the London Climate Action Week, and London is massively vulnerable to even low amounts of sea level rise. So this map shows in red areas that would be inundated with just 1 meter greater than present. And that's why London has this, the Thames Barrier. It's now 40 years old and costs £2.4 billion in today's money to construct. These multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects are what were deemed necessary to cope with the 23 centimeters of sea level rise we've now experienced since the start of the 20th century. But climate change is shifting the dials, and because losses from glaciers and ice sheets are accelerating, we now have to work out how to cope with sea level that is rising twice as fast as it used to, and could potentially experience a step change in acceleration in the future. Now, the Thames Barrier had to close 4 times in the 1980s. In the 1990s, it closed 35 times. In the 2000s and 2010s, it had to close 150 times. Now, the barrier was never designed to be used this frequently, and because of this, its tidal defences will have to be raised 15 years earlier than expected. But of course, some countries don't have the resources required to defend against this level of sea level rise. This is Calcutta under just 1 metre of sea level rise. This amount is now inevitable by the mid-2300s, but could occur by 2070 if current real-life emissions continue. At 3 metres, which could potentially occur as early as next century if emissions continue on their current path, this city will be gone. Karachi in Pakistan will also see extensive inundation, even at relatively low water levels. And these countries are often faced with the choice between fighting poverty or fighting climate change. And that is not a choice that any country should have to make. This is Dhaka in Bangladesh, home to 10 million people, just 1 metre of sea level rise. By 3 metres, this great city will become an island. But it's not just the least developed countries and small island states that will be affected by this problem. The G20 countries produced 80% of global emissions and will continue to have their economies, industries, and populations damaged by irreversible sea level rise for centuries unless they rapidly cut their emissions with an urgency we've never seen before. This is Shanghai at 1 metre and 3 metres. Miami at 1 and 3 metres. The EU, massively exposed to this risk at 1 metre. Tokyo, devastated at 1 metre, damaged beyond repair at 3. Brazil's Rio, it's at 1, massively impacted at 3. Now, these nations cannot shy away from the problem they have created through their relentless CO2 emissions, and they are now faced with a choice. Either we slow these impacts down to timescales of hundreds of years so that we can adapt, or we continue as we are, blowing past hard limits to adaptation and causing permanent loss and damage globally. This is a choice that we're going to have to make in this decade under the watch of world leaders today. We know what has to be done, and that is credible emissions reductions targets for 2030 and 2035, and then the political will to make these emissions reductions a reality. The science is absolutely clear. Now we just need a visionary response in global action. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Incredibly sobering. And I'm looking at those maps. It just really calls to mind something that somebody keeps on saying, which is it's cheaper now to save the world than it is to destroy it. Surely looking at those maps of cities, that the penny has to drop in capitals around the world, but particularly in the G20. Carol, you're coming to us from Tokyo, but you've spent a lifetime in not just these mountains, but mountains all over the world as an elite ultra runner. Can you just tell us about the changes that you've seen, and also talk a little bit about, I suppose, what kind of SOS is trying to bring about, which is, you know, harnessing the voice of mountain athletes, and what you think might be possible and what you specifically are setting out to do?
Thank you, Annie. So, hello, everyone. I am Carol, and as Annie said, I am based in Tokyo, and I am in charge of climate policy at the Tokyo British Embassy. And I am also a mountain athlete, and I spend years and years in the mountains, probably over 20 years, climbing the highest peak on the roof of the world. And I have climbed Mount Everest in 2018. And this was more or less one big decision I made, a revelation. So I decided to be more committed to fight against climate change, because the glaciers are melting. Expedition after expedition, I can really see the dramatic changes, and I can visually see that the ice is receding. So I think the glaciers are crying, and I should go. I should go. This is my moral obligation. And I think it's one of the projects that is the most important for me this year, at least.
Athletes, summiteers, they're an extraordinary community, aren't they? Hard to kind of deter. What do you think it might be possible to kind of reorient this community and invigorate this community in order to build more of a kind of mobilization to, as you say, shift the dial?
Yes, I think we need to utilize athletes and professionals of the outdoor industry all together, because the reach is quite unbelievable. If you see an athlete like Kilian Jornet, for example, he has such a great reach and he's doing so much to talk about those issues. So I think if we rally the key athletes and the one most present on the social media to inspire, but not only inspire, but show the visual storytelling as well, because if you visually see what's going on, you really want to take action. And as athletes, I think it's really easy to showcase what we can do on a daily basis, actually. So use, for example, more clean transportation, reduce energy consumption. There is tons of things we could do, tons. There is no little things, there is no small things. Is, as the filmmakers pointed out very well, we have to inform people through storytelling, and athletes are very good at that.
Thank you so much. So now we have managed to get Baba. Baba, thank you so much for joining us. You've spent the past decade climbing in the Himalayas, and you come from Bangladesh, from Chattogram, those forested area. You are a seasoned climate athlete advocate, having cycled through every single district of Bangladesh campaigning against plastic. I'd love just to hear what you saw on your last expedition. I met you just after you'd come down from Everest this spring. How are the climate changes impacting climbers in the region, and what has that motivated you to do?
First thing, actually, I noticed while I reached base camp on 10th April, there was a big rock over an ice pinnacle just beside my tent, actually. So it was on 10th April. So it was like really good to see. And when actually I came back from Lhotse Summit on 22nd May, the first thing I noticed that big rock actually fell from that ice pinnacle. So when I was there, I never thought like this kind of ice pinnacle may someday may like melt, and this rock may fall off. So it was something I saw. I should say that it's something that I never expected. And apart from these, I would like to say that I saw so many emerald green color lakes. Initially, while actually I didn't know much about this, that how these kind of lakes were created, and it's like pretty beautiful to watch. So when actually I was going up to the Kumbu ice fall for the first rotation, I just saw some like few frozen lakes, and while I was coming down, I saw some these lakes with this emerald green color, and all of them were like the upper portion all were melted. As I could also say about same thing about Imza Lake, which is in the Everest region. So there was no actually clue of that 70 years back. Right now, like it's like a tourist destination for many of us, and it's like for Kumbu for like last this year, I could say the experience. The route opening Sherpas, they had like really tough time, as Kumbu has become more shaky, more unstable due to these climate change things. And like for Camp 3 and 4, even the Sherpas were struggling, as there was less snow, and the climbers and the Sherpas, they were actually suffering in those exposed harder ice. So whenever there is less snow or ice, like there will be more exposed rocky sections, which is really tough for the climbers to negotiate. And apart from that, these like loose sections are also, I would say, tough to cross, as these are very loosey ones.
You're Minister for Climate Change Hassan Chowdhury, Bangladesh's Minister for Climate Change, gave a really remarkable presentation at the Mountain Experts Dialogue that the government of Nepal held. And he said something really memorable, which is, firstly, we don't want development aid. It was interesting to frame it in that way. We actually want G20 economies to cut your emissions. This is the most significant contribution that G20 economies can play in terms of these societies in Asia right now. And he also said, look, publics actually have to force your politicians to act. Without that public power, without that public push, then emissions reductions will not be made at the pace that they are required. Can you just respond to those comments from the Bangladesh climate change minister and the view from Bangladesh?
Well said, actually. Geographically, we are not part of the Himalayas. People of Bangladesh, they think that they are not part of the Himalayas. As the highest mountain we have in our country, it's like 1,061 meters only. So, but again, Bangladesh is a country which is actually it's the bestowal of the Himalayas. The glaciers coming from the Himalayas, they carry slates and like sediments through our rivers. So Bangladesh is the land of big rivers, and there are so many rivers around our country. So all the big rivers actually, they come from the glaciers of the Himalayas. So they are pretty important for us. So first we need to actually aware people about that that Himalayas are also important for us. Like if the Himalayas are like having tough times, we'll also have tough times, and mountains actually matter to me. So we are actually kind of a land which is actually squeezed between like sea level rise in the Bay of Bengal, and then again there is declining ice sheets in the Himalayas. So like we actually need to first we need to motivate people about that we need to understand them about that we are also part of the Himalayas. That would be the first thing actually we need to aware them about.
Thank you. We have a tiny bit of time for questions, maybe just at least one. And I think there's one in here. It says most of the presentations indicate the impact, but the question is how to address those problems created by climate change. I have a view on this, but I would probably like to bounce this first to James.
Yeah, of course. So I think what you've already said is very true here, really, that everyone can make their own small impact, that's for sure. But one of the biggest impacts that individuals can make is voting for politicians and regimes that will actually put pressure on the global system to actually change. The G20, as we said earlier, contribute 80% of emissions right now, and that is really where the cuts have to happen. These countries have the ability to, they have the resources to, and they have the capability to have a transition here, which is actually beneficial to their economy, to their jobs, to their green energy systems. And so we need to put more pressure at the highest, very highest level to really push this forward and change radically based on the latest science. So what we're trying to do here is using what we're seeing in the mountains, using what we're seeing at the seas, using what the science is saying, but then getting politicians together, educating them about this, and then using that science to push as hard as we can for urgent emissions reductions now.
We've got another question, which I'm going to bounce on to Tenzing, which is actually about air pollution. This specific question talks about wars. I don't think that's something that ICIMOD has looked at. Please, anyone raise their hands if they are an expert on this area and the contribution wars make to climate change, and any monitoring. But I wonder whether you could just speak quickly to kind of black carbon and air pollution in this region.
Yeah, as to the question, I think somebody already nicely put up a link there. I think an article that actually discusses on the impacts of specifically war-induced sort of what contribution war has. But despite that, I think generally talking about the impacts of all of these black carbon and dust that comes, it would have an impact on the glaciers as well, on the albedo effect, how it darkens the snow and darkens the ice as they deposit, and that has had a lot of impact on the glaciers and the snow. And there are a lot of studies being done trying to quantify how they will impact and how they're impacting the snow. I think I can share some links if somebody's interested. But regarding that particular question, I think at the moment, I do not have much information on how much this war would impact, but you can definitely look through the literature. And on the first question, I think besides a global effort on the climate change, of course, that is the way to look at the solution. But besides that, we also need to accept that the climate is changing, and then the other way is also to adapt and to mitigate. Nepal and most of the Southeast Asia countries, we do not have the enough funds to actually cover all of these damages that could come from the changing climate. So there is where these countries would need mitigative efforts, specifically from the more polluting countries and the more developed countries. I think the COP28 was able to establish this loss and damage fund, which could funnel these funds towards these least developed countries and the more affected countries. I think that is one way to look at adaptation and mitigation, but the core issue remains on a global action and a global effort and a consensus on trying to look at the climate effort.
Thanks. And I just would like to come in on the air pollution question, because those that are beaming in from this region, you'll be very much aware that Asia tops the worst pollution kind of zones annually, repeatedly, and there is a huge link between that and the acceleration of glacier melt, black carbon settling on the glaciers. We know that air pollution also wipes out up to 10 years and sometimes above that off the average life of people in Lahore, in Delhi, in Dhaka, in Kathmandu. So, ensuring that local and regional governments also focus on mitigation action around air pollution is key. I think we're going to close now because we've run slightly over time, but I just wanted to pick up on, what we can do, the solutions, and just kind of, I hope what we've seen within all these presentations is that there's still everything worth fighting for, on very low emissions pathways, as James showed. It's possible to save half of the glaciers. And what can you do? Raising your voice at this moment is really, really mission critical. Using your talents, if you're a filmmaker, if you're an athlete, vote. Trying to reshape the organizations where you work to ensure that they are accelerating the energy transitions themselves. There's an amazing activist in the US. He says something quite amazing, which is that nothing that we do at this stage will prevent suffering. But if we do all we can, there will be less suffering. And so that is the difficult calculus with which we find ourselves at this moment on the clock of the world. So please do carry on emailing us. Please do follow Save Our Snow. Please do sign up, SaveOurSnow.earth. Please follow the crowdfunder and support that. Follow the International Climate Cryosphere Initiative. Watch the films of Niall and Tashi. And yes, do get in touch if there are any specific ways that you would like to support. We're very actively interested in recruiting more and more champions from science, from sport, and also from the creative industries and indigenous communities. But, we're open to other ideas and other ways of working together as well. So with that, thank you so much to all of the panelists. Thank you so much to everybody who's joined from all over Asia and from London. Thank you.